Hi, I'm Angel Sarah, and today I'm going to be talking about my history of anxiety. I'm really excited to talk about this today because I was born with anxiety and it has gotten worse throughout my entire life. And I'm 28 now and have been really solidly working for the last about year and a half to really, my cat's running all around, to really heal myself of this anxiety. And I'm at a place now where I can confidently say that while negative emotions like anxiety or sadness or fear or worry are things that we're always going to deal with, they're more things that pass easily through my body now and not something that I'm holding and that's repeating these patterns, and instead is something that I observe and pass through me, and it even doesn't come up nearly as much because anxiety used to be a constant for me. And so I'm very happy with where I am now, and I hope my story of it gives you some insight, some inspiration, some hope. So I'm going to be going through things chronologically. I've also done other videos about my mental health. I have one with my entire mental health history as well as physical health history. So this one's just going to be focused on anxiety. Um, so as I said, I was born with anxiety due to stressors that were going on prenatally. And my anxiety got a lot worse by the age of 4 due to some really heavy trauma I experienced. So this is a trigger warning for mental health as well as abuse. I went through sexual abuse up until the age of 4, and this really affected my anxiety. And the person who did this to me also programmed me with DID. And the altar that I started out with, some call like your core altar, that was my trauma holder, is the primary one with a lot of anxiety. And then they programmed 2 altars and then a fourth one that came along when I was 4 to kind of mask the trauma holder was more of a people pleaser. And this altar also had a lot of anxiety because I didn't really want to live, unfortunately, since I was born here in this lifetime, because I wasn't having a good time. All I saw was trauma and pain. And yes, I was happy throughout times as well, but there wasn't ever a day that wasn't just tarnished with deep sadness, anxiety, fear, trauma. And so this altar had a lot of anxiety because while I didn't really want to be here, I just wanted to avoid conflict and make everyone else's lives as pleasant as possible. So I was very anxious about how I was appearing, my facial expressions. I also know now that I'm autistic, and I had a lot of anxiety about being really high masking, where I was constantly thinking about how I was positioned, my different facial expressions, how people were perceiving me, how I was affecting people. I was constantly trying to placate everyone's emotions, and it felt like my job. Also, throughout my life, people told me I was really did really well at talking to people with their feelings, so it almost felt like that made me feel worthy, and I was anxious that if I couldn't solve people's problems, then I would lose value. This also manifested in me really valuing school as a means to feel worthy of living and being here. I was also really anxious because I had a lot of intrusive thoughts, including intrusive, inappropriate sexual thoughts. And so I thought I was just a bad person because I didn't remember, after the age of 4, I didn't remember that trauma that I went through. So I understand now why I had those intrusive thoughts, but as a kid, I thought I was just born wrong. I thought I was born like an evil person. And I don't believe in good or bad versus in terms of people. Rather, people can do good or bad actions more or less aligned with an all-loving, source power. But I thought I was just born wrong. So I was very anxious. I was very anxious anytime I had a crush. I thought that I was just a bad person. I thought sex itself was just bad. Um, and it was very stressful. So, as I mentioned, school was really important to me because it made me feel like worthy as a person. I also had a lot of social anxiety. And I didn't realize any of this. I had no education on mental health growing up. I just identified as being really like shy and quiet. But it was really difficult for me to connect with my peers. I more did so just so I like appeared more typical, I guess, so that I had someone to sit with, someone to talk to, so I wasn't alone, because that gave me less anxiety because I was just kind of going along with the group. I had a lot more anxiety because I opened up about some of my trauma I was going through at home. I had several different caregivers, and one of them, the one that did inflict the sexual abuse, also did very intentional psychological torture throughout my life. And so I was very anxious about that. And I opened up to some friends, and for reasons, when they saw this person, they're very charismatic. So they didn't believe that this person could do that. And so I stopped sharing with people for a time what I was going through because I felt like I wasn't being believed. Also, I was very anxious with that caregiver because they always wanted to say that I was doing something wrong. Everything possible was wrong. I remember one year in particular. Again, I really care for schoolwork. I also really loved gaming when I was growing up, and I just wanted to, during the summer, just be on the computer all day long for just days at a time. But they were very upset and said we needed to get outside more. And so I decided that, like, this next summer, I'm not going to do anything inside. I'm only going to go outside, and I'm only going to do homework. It was like in high school, and I had all these books to read. And so I read each book like 2 or 3 times, marked it all. All I did was be outside, do yard work, etc. And they were upset that I was outside so much. So, and this was very intentional. It wasn't on a whim. It was very calculated. It was very planned out, kind of like a chess game. And so I was very anxious because I knew anything I did wouldn't please them, and I was stressful as a people pleaser because there wasn't anything I could do. So I never stood up for myself. I just agreed with everything they said, and I knew what was going on since the age of 4. So after whatever conversation, I would go back through my mind and figure out, okay, how did they convince me that I was lying? And I would like deprogram my mind. And it was a very intense and intentional thing I was doing after each conversation to keep myself sane. And so I would know who I am. Yeah, the only thing I really ever stood up for was to dance. I did ballet from the age of 4 to 18. And I experienced a lot of anxiety with dance as well, socially, because again, I just didn't really open up to people. I didn't feel very connected in general. And also in terms of a performance wise, kind of like I was at school, I felt very anxious um, about my skill level, about technique, and it made me kind of shrivel up inside my body. And so I wasn't allowing myself to like learn and make mistakes. And so I had a lot of anxiety about perfectionism. So it made it very difficult for me to improve. Even growing up, I took longer for me to read than the average person in my school. So I was always at the lowest reading level. I had so much anxiety that I wasn't at the level I thought I was because I thought I was failing. Like I even I needed glasses. I have LASIK now, but I needed glasses since I was in kindergarten and didn't get them since I was in 4th grade because I thought when you're taking a seeing test, again, it like represented your worth, just like a grade. So every time I would lie, I would copy the person in front of me. I memorized whatever they were doing, and I did that because I couldn't see it. But I didn't want to admit that because I thought that would make me less of a worthy, like valuable person in society. So I only have in that I got it in fourth grade too, because I would cry during them as well and had to retake them because it was so upsetting. Because I knew I needed glasses, but I couldn't come to terms with that. I thought I was failing as a person. In fourth grade, they made me retake it with someone who was just joining the school, so they'd never been there before. So I copied what that person did. They needed glasses, and so I finally got glasses, which was a great thing, but just to show how anxious I was about failing and that I even perceived this as failing. Um, but yeah, I was talking about dance and yeah, how that was difficult as well. Oh, right, and about reading. And so I was so anxious to read that I couldn't comprehend what was going on the page. I was get so frustrated, and I carried this identity that I was a poor reader all throughout high school even. So I was always just a slower reader compared to most people. And it wasn't until my like second or like third or fourth year of my bachelor's degree that I was suddenly expected to read hundreds to thousands of pages a week. And I was like, shit, what am I gonna do? I'm a terrible, I can't read this fast, not possible. I'm like, well, that's what they expect, so I'll at least try. I tried and immediately I could do it. So it was like almost like I was holding myself back because I placed this identity of who I thought I was. And this is very amalgamous too to my anxiety in general that, well, it wasn't actually until I was 17 that I identified as having anxiety because I didn't really know about it until then. I discovered like mental health like on Tumblr at that time, and I was like, wow, I'm anxious. And I have social anxiety. It's not just I'm not just shy, I'm not just quiet. Like I'm really struggling. Um because I thought that I left this caregiver that I've mentioned when I was 17 because I thought the court system wouldn't work fast enough for it to be worth it for them to try to get me to come back. So I left when I was 17 and I thought I wouldn't be anxious anymore because I attributed any of my mental struggle to them. Unfortunately, I was still anxious. I didn't realize it wouldn't just disappear, just like, the PTSD didn't disappear, the depression didn't disappear once this person left my life. Obviously, it was positive. I wasn't continuing to be traumatized by this person, but it was very heartbreaking for me because I didn't realize it, again, it felt like I was failing at something again. At the end of high school, while I had mostly straight A's, I almost didn't graduate because I stopped going to school for like 2 weeks in the last semester. As I mentioned, I didn't really want to be living in general. I was only really living to be for other people or to be viewed like as a person, but I never wanted to live for me. I loved everyone else. I always even loved the people that were hurting me. I just had this universal love for all people, but I never loved myself. So I didn't want to graduate high school because I didn't have a plan after that because I was only doing high school because you like, for the most part, have to do high school. And so I stopped going to school. I was very anxious to complete it. I did come back after 2 weeks, graduated with C's, and then for like a year and a half, I did nothing. I was numb. I didn't feel anxious. I felt nothing. All I did was watch YouTube. I lost like all my muscle mass I gained from dance because my dance ended at 18 too in the company I was in. I had no activities. I hardly spoke to anyone, and it was awful. Luckily, I did keep living. I didn't have any active plan to end my life, but I didn't want to be living. But it was nice to not feel anxious anymore. I just felt nothing. I started dating when I was 19, and I was grateful for this in the sense that I had something to do I wasn't doing nothing anymore. However, my anxiety came back very full force because I was really just doling it out. I was still very anxious. I was still very much a people pleaser, and so I didn't show up for myself in my relationships. And I didn't really show up for other people either, because I didn't, it was like there wasn't anything, like in school, there was something you could do the best at, but like in relationships, I didn't care about myself, and I just didn't really honor the other people as well. So I did a lot of things that were not moral and that were harmful. And throughout this, I had health issues too, because someone I was in a relationship with, it ended for various reasons, and this made me very anxious, or almost like turn off my anxiety, and it was just a poor situation for my health. And that continued with someone else I was with, where I felt so anxious because I was with someone who didn't want to be with me anymore because I had hurt them. And so when I was with them, I, like, my body stopped functioning basically. and and basically, like, I had really intense constipation. I had constant UTI symptoms but no UTI, and intercourse became very painful. And so I went to a pelvic floor physical therapist, and unfortunately, instead of ending the relationship, I continued on with it, um, even though it wasn't conducive to my health. And I felt too anxious to properly do the therapy because of what this other person I was with, what they desired. So it took a while for me to heal those issues. I also became a lot more anxious around the age of 21 because my memories of the sexual abuse that happened up until the age of 4, they returned, they resurfaced. One of the alters this person programmed was suicidal and was programmed to end my life when I remembered. So I was very anxious because my intrusive thoughts that were of the sexual nature and inappropriate really ramped up at this time, and it just like reaffirmed to me that I was like a bad person, like I was born a bad person. um and yeah, so my anxiety just my whole life kept getting worse and worse and worse, and so I just thought that that's kind of how my life was gonna go, and it was just gonna continue getting worse because that's the trend I saw. So I ended up um I ended up ending some of my relationships because of my anxiety. I got so anxious being with people. Um and one of the reasons too is that while I would be upfront about myself that I'm polyamorous, I would get myself into monogamous relationships, like just to be with someone and to people please, which was very irresponsible of me and very unfulfilling. Um, and so I would really have an idea, like a sunk cost fallacy too, of like, well, I've been with this person for X amount of time, so I can't just end things. I need to try to make them work out. And so when I was a bit older, more like 24, I started saying, okay, if I'm going to be with people, I need to at least be myself. I need to at least have boundaries. I need to at least care about myself. And so I tried that, and it was just everything was falling apart because it kind of appeared on the outside. I suppose like I was a different person because I had never truly been myself. I had really only tried to be someone for someone else. I never tried to be someone for myself. And so my relationships ended very, very drastically, very chaotically. Um, when I was 24, I had so much anxiety. I was having panic attacks and anxiety attacks most days. And what happened is all my muscles contracted. They were stuck, like all of them, and I had to be in like a wheelchair, and went to the hospital, and they pumped me full of like lorazepam, and my muscles relaxed. And I realized at that point that what happened was I had an autistic burnout. I didn't know I was autistic at this time. And basically, all my sensory issues just skyrocketed. Lights were too much, sound was too much, touch was too much, everything was too much. And I lost most just daily living skills. I didn't know how to eat. I didn't know how to bathe. I just didn't know how to take care of myself. And for like 3 to 4 months, my mom just completely took care of me while I had been living independently up until this point. And it was really tough. And another thing I really took from some of the relationships that I was in was that while I'd always had the urge to self harm, first of all, I didn't know that was an option until I was like 17. But secondly, I didn't really ever have an urge. I never went through with anything like that until I was in some of these relationships. Unfortunately, when I would harm myself, then the immediate whatever trauma was going on would end, because they didn't want me to hurt myself more. And so anytime that I would feel ashamed, even after being in these relationships, it was like an automatic, like conditioned response for me to hurt myself. That took, I would say, like a good year for me to phase out of, and it was very difficult. Um, I even just felt very anxious, even in relationships after that, where I was being more myself. I would get into things very quickly, and I think what was happening is that I had a lot of anxiety that my new relationships would have the same patterns as my old relationships. And so I just brought that anxiety with me, and it was difficult for my mental health to be compatible with other people. After that, now I'm like 25 at this point. I'm 28 now. About like maybe 6 months later is when I discovered that I have autism. And I discovered I had DID and that I have ADHD as well. And this was really amazing, because now I really understood my neurotype better, how my mind works. It just, a lot of things made sense. And I also discovered that I had chronic pain, something I was born with, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and POTS. And so I felt so good not being in relationships. I knew like all the things that were affecting me. I had all these different things I could identify with. Because if you don't even know, I guess, like who you are or what issues you're going through, it's really difficult for those things to change. So now at least I knew like who I was and what I was dealing with, which made me very happy. I felt like I knew myself. An unfortunate, or in the long term fortunate, side effect of this autistic burnout I went through at 24 is I no longer could people please. I completely lost that coping skill. I still have my coping skill of dissociation, but I couldn't people please. And that made me very anxious, and all my relationships around me started falling apart, outside of romantic relationships, because I suddenly became aware of a lot of things, and I no longer was able to people please. So instead, I got angry. And I had never really expressed anger that much up until this point. So it was very shocking for me as well. I just got very angry. I wanted to stop people pleasing. I wanted to have boundaries, but I would just say it very angrily to people. And I was very mad because I had pent up. Like, people pleasing causes so much resentment. Um, and so it was not very conducive. And I took space from a lot of people who are back in my life now. And that was something that was helpful for that time. And anyways, now, this is from the age of like 25 to 27. I couldn't people please. I knew what I was dealing with. I started just really accommodating myself, really accommodating my anxiety. I started having fidget toys with me most of the time, sunglasses and earplugs. I would have chewy necklaces and allow myself to stim, which I just never allowed myself to do because I didn't even know that I was masking. And now I knew I had DID as well. I knew I had chronic pain, so I started providing myself with mobility aids, getting a disability pass, and it was really wonderful. So all this was happening, but again, everything just kept getting worse. I was managing my symptoms, but that was the base of it. I knew what they were, finally, like by the age of 25, 26, I knew what I was dealing with, and now I was committed to managing everything. I wanted to live, for the most part. I wanted to live for me, which was great. And that's kind of where I was at. So everything changed for me when I was 27. So when I was 27, I had a spiritual awakening. Spirituality caused a lot of anxiety for me before. I was raised Christian, never really had that much connection, became like agnostic as an adult. I was really scared of things like magic or witchcraft because of some things that happened in my family. And so I just never really looked into religion. I'm just like, I don't know and I don't care. But anyways, I had a near-death experience that like sent off, it felt like a lightning bolt through me. And I remembered a past life, something I previously did not believe in. And for 3 weeks, I had no symptoms of any mental or physical health. Symptoms I was born with. So there was never a time in my life where I'd ever not experienced having that. It was incredible. I did have to physically keep myself in alignment. I had an injury in my neck and I would have died like if I stopped keeping it aligned. But otherwise, I had no anxiety. I had no anxiety talking to people. I had no anxiety about sleep. My sleep was amazing. My food was amazing. I had a lot of anxiety about food previously, which I want to make a whole separate video about food and eating. And it was incredible. After 3 weeks it ended, I believe, because my injury had healed. So I didn't need to be like that anymore. But also I wasn't very grounded. Like I didn't have the root system structure to support this mentality. So for the next like 3-4 months, I was devastated. All the anxiety came back, all the pain came back. It was awful. It's like I had this little window into what my life could look like. But it also gave me a lot of hope because, again, I thought I would always only be managing symptoms of anxiety and everything else, and that would be my entire life because it had been my entire life up until this point. So also around this time, this was more around the time of like October 2024. I hadn't been dating anyone since I was 25, and I got to a place where I felt so good of like, I really want to live for me, and I never felt this way before. It's so exciting. And I also had such terrible experiences dating that I got to a point I felt so detached where I'm like, honestly, I think I would be fine even if I never date anyone again. And like my relationships had been very important to me, and just the idea of love and romance was very important to me. And I felt like, yeah, if that happens, that happens, but if it doesn't, I don't need that as a reason to live or feel like an identity outside of myself to keep myself here on earth. And when that happened, it was very funny. Almost immediately, like maybe a week later, as soon as I really felt detached, I hadn't been dating for like 2 years, I started to get crushes on people before, something I hadn't experienced like for those 2 years. And so that was really refreshing. It also did bring up a lot of anxiety within me because I started thinking about who I am because I feel so confident in who I am now. But I started going back into like, but what if that person doesn't like this part of me. For example, I had anxiety about, like, I'm a trans man. What if they don't like trans people? What if they don't like that I'm very feminine? I love pink. I love stuffed animals. Maybe I'm not manly enough to be a man. Just all this anxiety of feeling like someone wouldn't love me for the entirety of who I am. And I got to a point recently where I realized I don't just want someone to accept who I am, but someone to fully embrace who I am and love all the parts of me, not just something to tolerate, right? And so this was very healing and helped me get through a lot of my anxiety that I had with dating in general. Um, Around this time as well, I decided, after 3, 4 months after my spiritual awakening, after this magical 3 week window of no anxiety ended, I'm like, I want to get back to that. Clearly, it's not going to magically come back. I need to do something. And so I started being more open to spirituality then. I started seeing tarot readers and on TikTok, which I was terrified of, right? Because I thought of like witchcraft and black magic, and a lot of these ideas are actually just very, very colonial and very oppressive, which I didn't realize. So I looked into the history as well, which really helped me, and I came to an understanding that all religion, science, and as well is just a lens to see things through, and that tarot reading, you don't have to have the cards. They're just a tool. You can just get information straight from your mind. You can just look around the room, and it's more your intuition and pulling together a story that feels very genuine in your heart, and then having the belief that it's being sent out to who it's meant to be sent out to. And that loving energy and that faith is what energetically sends out very real, like quantum material that does not so much influence what's happening, but it's like you're pulling from what already has happened in a sense and communicating that. But most people, I would say, are tuned off from this frequency of living because they're very disconnected with themselves. So I wasn't previously connected with myself. So I started setting intentions, basically to heal my mental and physical health. And it's been a little over a year later, and that has happened. So up until then, I was more in a place of healing, where I was like, before, like 25, after, I was like managing mental health. And now at like 27, I'm like healing mental health. It's possible. I know. I literally felt it for 3 weeks. I can get there again. And so I set all these intentions. I started doing shadow work very intentionally and very constantly. Now I do it about every 2 weeks on like the full moon and the new moon. I look at where my moon is in like my astrological chart to do like specific prompted journaling from like my astrological house. And I found that helpful. And I journal like if anything in particular comes up. Also, one thing I did in last spring, 2025, was I listened to all my intrusive thoughts, which I had a lot from anxiety too. And they always were there. Again, also I had altars, so they were all there at the same time. But I really hated all the like voices in my head. I never really heard voices, just more like your own thoughts, I'll just call them voices. So I hated all these voices in my head because they were causing me distress, physical pain, mental pain. So I was just really hating myself, and it was causing me to just deteriorate. So I basically reparented myself. I listened to all the thoughts, as loud as they would get, as hateful, as angry, as hurt, as sad, and I listened to them all. And after about 2 months of this really intense, constant listening to my thoughts, which was so painful, they went away. And I'd lived this way all my life, other than that 3 week period, and this was just incredible. Past then, I still did have some intrusive thoughts of anxiety, and I'm like, well, that makes sense. That was the altar that I had shielded. when I was 4 that didn't really come out again until I was 21, the trauma holder. So I haven't had as much experience with this altar that attributes to like most of my anxious thoughts. And that's kind of what I reasoned with myself here as well. Um, and it wasn't really until a few weeks ago where I do still enjoy listening to tarot readings and do them myself as well, where someone mentioned just identifying instead of healing as being healed. And that really helped me because while I identified that with everything else, my chronic pain, my depression, my PTSD, um, things like that, I still was identifying up until like a few weeks ago as healing from anxiety. But I'm like, no, let me just try that on, like trying on clothes. Let me try how it feels identifying with I'm healed from anxiety. And it was amazing because basically, as I mentioned, we're always going to have anxious thoughts, but anxiety, as like an anxiety disorder, I can be healed from that and still have an anxious thought and let it go. But I was still identifying as healing, so I was putting that energy out into the world. And something that really helped in the last few months with my anxiety is I realized that, well, I'm really excited about the future now. I'm really excited to be living, to be here. It's incredible. I haven't spent hardly any of my life like this so far, and I'm just so pleased to be here. And one thing that I did as a kid, um, a lot of it was because of that, the psychological torture where if I was like standing up for myself with dance and trying to stay in dance classes, I was rehearsing what I would say over and over and over, and I wanted to believe that if I said it the right way, then this person would listen to me or do what I was asking, which was to be in dance. I also had a lot of anxiety about I would just like rehearse conversations a lot in general. Like if someone was going to ask me what I was thinking, I would have a planned response because whatever I was thinking was extremely distressful and I was too anxious to share that. So like I felt like I always had to have like something to say in replacement of that. And what I realized I was doing, while I got rid of a lot of rumination of the past, instead I journal, which has just been so helpful. I realized what I was doing these last few months is that I was imagining conversations I really want to have with people, either in the near future, like something that just happened, or like in the further out future if I'm thinking of certain manifestations or things I want to do. And I was rehearsing these conversations over and over in my head. I felt very excited about it. I would even rehearse like videos like this that I would be doing like on YouTube because I'm like, I'm so excited to talk about this. And while I think manifestation, like, visualizing where you want to be is really helpful, at least for me, it's been more helpful to more just feel the feelings you want to feel and maybe see the things you want to see, but less so have the conversations you want to have. At least for me, I realized that it was setting up almost like an expectation that I would like plan, oh, I'm going to say this thing first and then this thing and then this thing. Then I would call someone up to have the conversation I wanted to have. And as conversations do, it didn't flow perfectly like that because I couldn't anticipate perfectly what they were going to say. And then I realized it made sense to say it in a different order. But then I was thinking back to the conversation I rehearsed in my head 20 times, not because I was anxious, but because I was excited about it. And I realized overall that doing that was giving me a lot of anxiety during conversations. So while I still do like to imagine how I want to feel with other people or activities or things I'm doing, it's been really helpful to completely let go of any type of rehearsing in my head things I'm going to say. So even like for videos like this for YouTube, I've just completely don't have a plan, and it's been really great. So because I would get really excited, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna think about all the things I'm gonna say, but then while I'm saying the things, I'm thinking back to the conversations, the thoughts I was having in my head. And so it was really taking me out of the present moment because being present is just so important to me. It's how we live. It's heaven on earth. That's what heaven on earth is, living in the present instead of in the future, instead of in the past. It's still really important to think about the past, but be present of how you think about it, and then think about the future, but think about how your present body thinks of it. And then when you can just let the emotions flow through you, because even if you are present, you could still be experiencing like hell on earth because you're closing yourself off. There's all this guilt and shame that you're not allowing yourself to feel fully and wash out. So it's just really important to experience like heaven on earth, to be present with how you feel, to allow all the feelings, all the thoughts to be there, not identify with them, and then let them out. I'm just so happy. With my anxiety, it was really helpful to identify I have anxiety, live in that identity, then identify with I'm healing my anxiety, and then finally identify with my anxiety is healed. I experience anxiety sometimes. It is not me. I will love all the thoughts and emotions. I'll let my body feel them, and I will release them. So that is my history of anxiety, and I'm so excited to share other aspects of this last year and a half as time goes on and really delve into specifically what I did to heal it. So I hope this video gave you some insights, some hope or inspiration, and I look forward to continuing talking about my health here on YouTube.